Hey, everybody. Okay, we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is how to build a great scorecard. This tool, when it's used right, or correctly, it is transformative to a department and certainly to a business. So let's get into it. How do we build a great scorecard? So the place I want to start with is this concept. If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. And this was put together by Lord Kelvin, a British scientist from the 1800s. He's actually has a unit of measurement, kelvins, around temperature named after him. And the big piece that he's got is that once we actually have measurables and we can see what the metric's doing, then we can start to figure out how to improve those things. So if I don't know what my baseline is, how can I improve it? Key concept. All right. Here's a big, bold statement. A single metric transformed the auto industry. It's transformed the auto industry, and I would argue it's still one of the most important metrics that exist in all of the auto industry. And it's just a single number that was deemed important and had billions of dollars of impact, if not trillions of dollars. So let's talk about this. So up to 1975, all the different vehicles out there treated fuel economy as just another metric. It was just one of many that was out there. And up to that point in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, early 1970s, fuel economy didn't matter. And if you take a look at this from a performance standpoint, you saw that like it was anywhere 13 to 15 miles per gallon. Nobody really cared that much. And when we took a look at all the different metrics that existed for all the different vehicles, there was a lot of data, and fuel economy was just one of those things that was in there. Well, in 1973, things changed. The U.S. experienced its first oil shock. And really what happened was, due to some embargoes from the Middle East, there was not enough gas in the United States, and oil prices jumped 300% practically overnight. We had a shortage in this country. People couldn't get their vehicles filled back up, and it was deemed a crisis on a national basis. And so something had to change. And in 1975, the US Congress released a bill that focused on this idea of fuel efficiency. Before that, it was just one metric. Then it became the metric. And with this, they said, okay, manufacturers, you need to improve the vehicles, but we're going to do something in addition to that. We are going to draw everybody's attention to it. We're going to force labels to go onto the cars that basically show what that mile per gallon efficiency number is. All eyes were on this single metric. Before that, it didn't matter. Now it did. And right away, you started to see this improvement in performance as the laws started to take effect and that people started to pay attention to it. And so from the 1975 to about 1990, the numbers had a dramatic upward increase, of which they kind of leveled off until the 2000s, about a 10 to 15 year kind of leveled off a little bit. And then world events drove more attention to this metric again. The global warming crisis, if we want to call it that, I'm not trying to make any political statements here, but as global warming kind of picked up, fuel economy became a big issue. And then all of a sudden, electric vehicles started to come into their own. The electric vehicle was the ultimate solution to fuel efficiency because it uses electricity, not gasoline. And these metrics mattered. In 2014, so it started out 1975. Now in 2014, surely 30 years later, 79% of consumers valued fuel efficiency above safety and above price. It became one of the most important things for so many different people. For so many people, it became the most important thing. And the company that led in miles per gallon, Tesla, became the most valued car company in the world. And today it's worth more than the next seven next largest companies combined. A Tesla averages 150 miles per gallon. Okay, how do you do that with an electric vehicle? You can see down here, 1 gallon of gas equals this amount of electricity production based on the electricity production in these big electric plants. But basically, Tesla dominates on the miles per gallon. Tesla dominates in the electric vehicle place. And now this miles per gallon thing is becoming one of the most important things in this automotive industry, if not the single biggest influence out there. One number in such a big, complex industry as automobiles. But think about what it's done. The single metric drives simplicity and context. Hey, how's that vehicle with fuel? Fuel efficiency is 30 miles per gallon. Everybody understands what that means quickly. It's predictable. Fuel efficiency is 27 miles per gallon in the city and 35 miles per gallon on the highway. I can now start to plan how much money I should be spending for energy to be able to pay for these vehicles because of this metric's clarity. Which leads to the next thing, clarity. I want a vehicle that has at least 28 miles per gallon. I can now look at this, measure this, see if we can do this very, very quickly. And it drives improvement. We need to boost our vehicle to 32 miles per gallon overall for next year's edition. Everybody's going to understand what that's going to be, and whether it's going to be to improve our tires or our aerodynamics or whatever, we're going to basically have all eyes trying to fix on how to do that improvement. This is what the power of measurables can do for us. It gives us simplicity and predictability and clarity and the ability to improve on a very constant basis. So every department in an organization, including the most creative ones. I know I hear it all the time. Sales is a number-driven organization, but the rest of them, that's more creative, that's harder. Yes, it is harder. Totally agree. But every department, even an entire business, can be boiled down to a handful of measurables where we talk about like how much sap I need to basically get just that really valuable maple syrup. We're talking about the same thing. I may have a department, I may have 100 metrics of data that I'm paying attention to. But at the end of the day, the success or failure of this department is going to come down to a handful of things. And the leader's job is to figure out what those handful of things are and make sure that everybody knows what those things are. So these key measurables are going to transform because they increase our focus and attention to the things that matter. All right, so let's talk about how do we use this? How do we operationalize this? So EOS has a scorecard, and the structure of the scorecard is extremely defined. Please do not deviate from this structure because of what it's going to do. So let's get into it. The first thing we have to do is we have to identify the 5 to 15 measurables that drive the success or failure of my department. What are those 5 to 15 measurables? And sometimes you knock those things out in 2 hours. You're like, wow, we really nailed it. Other times it takes weeks and weeks of iterations. You're like, yeah, that one's right. This one's not. That one's right. This one's not. We want to get to a place where we go, yes, my department success or failure really comes down to these 5 to 15 things, and less is more. Don't get below 5. Then you're getting a little too one-sided. So we would say 5 to 15 is where we want to be. For every single measurable, we should have a goal. We should understand what is success and what is failure. What are we supposed to do this week? And if we don't, what is a problem? That's what we want to set with that goal. Not what we want to be in 2 years from now. We want to basically set a predictable number that we should be able to see us do week in and week out. And for every single measurable, we want to know exactly who is responsible for it. Here's a little reality here. If I have a measurable, I go, I don't know who's responsible for it. I would be willing to bet your performance on that measurable is not that great because you don't know who's going to be watching that and sweating that and making sure that number is getting better and better and better. We want to know exactly who owns every single measurable, not just because we want them watching it and raising the flag when the number's bad, but because when a person knows that this is a metric that I am responsible for, they get to apply their creative might, their genius to figure out how to basically blow out that number and make it as successful as possible. So this is why we want every single measurable to have an owner. And then we're going to take 13 weeks and we're going to measure this every single week, but we want to be able to see the latest week against the last 13 weeks or last 12 weeks. And the reason we want to do that is because when a number is below the goal, or if it's killing the goal, we want to know, is it a blip? Is it an anomaly? Or is it a trend? Because those are two very different actions that we got to go take depending on what that is. So this is the structure of the scorecard. It's being used by like 100,000 companies today. It is a super successful model. Please do not adjust the scorecard. This will lead to transformative results in your business. I promise you. So let's get it a little bit more specific. Measurables 5 to 15. Really gets down to the success or failure of the department. If you start off with 20 or 25, that happens a lot. Just make sure that you're distilling it down to get to that 5 to 15. Then we're going to go set that goal. Now, what happens kind of a lot is we go, I'm not really sure what that goal should be, so I want to baseline it first. Here's what I'd suggest you do. Put a number in. Let's say I've got some measurable. It's maybe my win rate. Put a number in there. I want to be winning at 80%. And the reason being is if I come in at 60%, if I see it and it's red because we put down 80%, that goal is going to bother me. And it's going to force a discussion about what the goal should be. And that's what we want. If I leave it blank and we start to see we're doing 60 and 62 and 58, 59, 63, we'll leave it blank forever. And so when we put a number in there, even if it's wrong, it's going to drive us crazy until we get the right number in there. So let's get that number in there. The second piece about the goal is get good at predicting. If we want to basically run a 5-minute mile, don't go put 5-minute mile right away if you're running a 10-minute mile. Set a goal. All right, over the course of the next 13 weeks, we got to get to a 7.5-minute mile. So I'm going to basically be looking for us to do 8-minute miles or 7.5-minute miles in that first month that I want to see us do on a regular basis. And then after that, we'll go for next month, maybe 6-minute mile. And then the month after that, maybe like 5-minute mile. But that's what we're trying to accomplish. Get good at predicting first. Okay, third, we want to know who that owner is. We already talked about it, but at the end of the day, this is a driver for accountability. We want to know who is responsible for what, and then we want to unleash that person's creative genius to be able to figure out how to make that number as successful as possible. This should be an enablement function. This should be something that creates inspiration and excitement for people. This isn't a place where we're just going to basically put them under a microscope and say, hey, you were supposed to build 10 widgets and you only built 9. Bad. We want that person looking at it going, all right, we're at 9. I've got to get it over 10. I have some ideas about how we're going to take it to 15. That's what we want to be able to see in our people on the scorecard. And then we want to see those 13 weeks comparatively. The biggest thing I want to get to here is that if I have a lot of red on my scorecard, do not allow yourself to get numb to it where you're used to seeing red. We want a green scorecard. We want to see if something's red, this is one of the most important things in our department, and we freak out over it. We got to get that green again. That's the spirit that we want to get to. Red gets a lot of attention, not something we get used to. How do we make this green next week? The beauty of the scorecard, my favorite thing about when I see a good scorecard in place is the numbers just start to naturally, without a lot of push, naturally start to improve. And the reason why they start to improve is because everybody understands them and everybody is trying to drive towards the same thing. So what gets measured gets done. I love this quote. It's from, I believe, the 1980s from Tom Peters. The guy wrote a big bestseller book called In Search of Excellence. So your objective, if you choose to take it on, is to build a great scorecard and keep it green. Leverage simplicity, drive predictability, create clarity, and then set yourself up for continuous improvement. So this is how we build a great scorecard. I hope this makes sense to you. Feel free to watch this as many times as you need to until that scorecard is doing these very things. So with that in mind, please, here's my email. It's rick@outpaceenterprises.com. If you have questions, feel free to shoot me a message. I am more than happy to answer as many questions as you can muster. Thank you for your time, everybody. Hope to talk to you soon.